Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Ian Harris. He is a technology expert and founder of Pulse Podcast. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Hi, AJ. Welcome. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
You are welcome to the show, Ian. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk about. We'll be talking about the promise of artificial intelligence, and we'll get to understand all that is good, not so good, and all the bad things also that it can do to humanity in the future that people are fearful of. We'll talk about that. But first, to understand from you, Ian, exactly, I've told you you are a technology expert, the founder of Pulse Podcast, but you have done a lot of work with large companies in their product and technology strategy. So I want you to tell them a bit about your journey, about the kind of work you have done, so that they know exactly who Ian Harris is, what expertise he holds in technology.
Oh, for sure. So I've been building technology platforms for many years, and helping companies devise their product and technology strategy. So looking at where a company is at the moment, trying to work out where they want to get to, and then using technology to help deliver those products into the marketplace. And I've done that both in the US, in Europe, and now in Australia, where I'm currently sitting. And lovely to talk to everyone in India and other parts of the planet as well. So great to be here.
Right. Now, let's talk about the promise of technology and what technology is doing, artificial intelligence is doing at the moment. How do you look at artificial intelligence? People are looking at artificial intelligence in their own way. As a technology person, you will obviously look at it from a different angle. But in terms of people, what are the things that are good in two aspects? One is from the business aspect, the work people do, either work-wise. Second is the life part of it. So the good, the not the bad, and the ugly part that can happen, which all these people, even the godfather of internet, artificial intelligence, and even to the OpenAI CEO, he also has been talking about that it can really go bad. So help us understand what we should understand of all the voices that are coming up from ChatGPT. We have moved on to GPT-4, and people are waiting for so many other versions to come in. So we want your expertise on this. Help us, give us a peek into a bit of a future of artificial intelligence in our lives and business.
Okay, so we've been using artificial intelligence for many years, and back even 10 years ago, we were looking at how can we train computers to learn things, how can we train them to understand what's going on around us. And a good way of understanding what artificial intelligence has been like in the past has been we can feed it a number of images that have, for example, a number in it, the number 0 to 9. And we feed it thousands and thousands of someone having drawn the letter 0, the number 0, someone having drawn the number 1. And then after having done that thousands of times, we can present it with another image of a number, and they use that training to decide what number it is that it thinks it's been given. Now, what's happening really when we do that is we're actually feeding the AI engine a series of numbers that represent the pixels of the image. And then we're saying this represents the number 7, for example. And then using that to help to train the artificial intelligence to understand what a number is. It doesn't really understand what a number is. All it really understands is that this series of numbers that represent the image, it's told that this is the number 7, for example. And then once we give it another image, it can look at that image and go, well, you know what? It's pretty close to what I think of as the number 7 as far as my training has been concerned. And so we have a set of data that's the training set, and we have a set of data that's the test set. And based on that test results, we can decide that, yeah, it's doing pretty well at understanding what is the number 7 when it sees an image. Now, that's a pretty simple example. And back many years even, we were looking at what we call optical character recognition. So being able to understand the text of a page, for example, by presenting it to a computer. That all seemed fairly fine and fairly inert, really. It didn't really seem to be much of a threat. But now what's happened is that we're actually able to start using our training data that's much bigger than just an image or a number or a letter. What we're doing now is actually using training data of the entire internet. So using all the publicly available data, everything that's on Wikipedia, for example, all the publicly available websites, and feeding all this text in and saying, this is a bunch of text that makes sense. Now, based on this information, I want you to create some text based on what you already know. And this is what we're calling a large language model. So using a model that's based on a large amount of data. It's based on language, so based on text itself. So not based on images, but based on the actual text. And indeed, not just English, but lots of different languages as well. And so based on that information, now the large language model can start doing things like, okay, let's create a story or create something from scratch, or based on this amount of information, this text, what is the answer based on what you understand? And this is why I think it's now gone from being something that's basically useful and inert to being something that people are considering, oh, hang on a tick, does this affect what I do as a job? Is this going to affect what I'm actually doing on a day-to-day basis? And I think a good example of that is when we have large language models now that understand about programming. They understand about code. Okay, so now we can say to a large language model, based on all the code that you've seen on, for example, on GitHub, all the publicly available code, everything you've seen on Stack Exchange. Now, give me a snippet of code in, say, TypeScript that can download an RSS feed of a podcast and download all the episodes and now understand the text that's in it, and to give me a summary of that particular text itself. Okay, that sounds something a programmer would take, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour to sit down and do. And now the artificial intelligence can spit out something that can do that in a few seconds, maybe a minute. It can give us the answer to that sort of problem. So in some ways, it's going to change the way we do our work. For a programmer, instead of spending an hour doing something, we can now ask a tool to do it in a few seconds, in a few minutes, maybe. It still needs fixing, but then most code that comes from humans is the first draft and needs updating as well. But now we can do something that is, it's a good way of thinking about it is it's a really good force multiplier. So instead of just having me doing programming, for example, I've got me and the power of all the code that's ever been written that's publicly available. I can now use that to accelerate my development. So instead of programming taking hours or days, I can reduce that amount of time, at least for small parts of the actual code itself, down to minutes. And so now I can get things done a lot faster than I could do previously. And so it is fundamentally going to change the way that we work.
Right, Ian. Till this point, it is good. But I want to understand now when people are saying it can go beyond that. So I want to understand what exactly is the purpose of artificial intelligence. Everything is made for some purpose. And till when the purpose is to teach us, though if I understand, this is all the data that has been collated with all the knowledge that already exists, and then with the use of all that data, all the everything available that you feed into those machines, they learn out of it, and then they come out with things and give results to you as per your prompts or search. So and it could be others material, but you will never know, because some words here, some words here, pulled out of hundreds and hundreds of hours of data that is available. So what are we learning new here, except for few things here? So help us in both that sense, that what is the purpose of artificial intelligence? Will we stop at that purpose, or there is a devious purpose beyond that? So help us understand. And in terms of learning also, are we learning new, or it is the same old stuff?
Good question. I mean, some big questions there. So, firstly, there's probably three different types of artificial intelligences that it's worth exploring here. So, first is large language models generating text. So now we can create a large amount of text relatively easily. So I can say, write a blog post about how AJ's podcast is amazing and everyone should listen to it, and it can spit out a couple of paragraphs completely truthfully, very convincingly, and I can use that for my marketing materials. Okay, so it can start accelerating my work. It can make things easier for me. It can do things that are perhaps a little mundane pretty easily. And now I need some human intervention to try and sparkle it up a bit and add some links into it and make it a bit more interesting, perhaps. But it's going to start to make my job easier if I'm doing text, for example, writing text. That's one example. Okay, but what now if I'm using artificial intelligence to generate voices? So I can take text and turn that into speech. So if I can train an AI to sound like I do, then do I need me anymore? Can I just use this AI to generate text, generate speech? Well, that's one of the things we're actually doing in Pulse Podcast is taking text that we've generated a script for a podcast and then using AI voices to turn it into a very realistic sounding and persuasive and engaging podcast. So we see that as a good thing because it allows us to reach a niche audience for podcasts that wouldn't be able to do this previously. So as you know, it takes time and effort to make a podcast. You have to edit it. You have to write a script. You have to maybe license music, get music engaged. You have to then spend time marketing it and delivering it. Part of that effort is involved in the actual mechanical aspects of actually generating that podcast. And if you're a small company, it can be quite expensive to actually create a podcast that actually supports your marketing efforts. So at Pulse Podcasts, we actually spend time doing this using artificial intelligence. So it means that this effort takes less time, less energy, and can be done at a lower cost. So we see that as a good thing. I think where it steps over that line, though, that you're talking about, AJ, is, okay, so what if I'm in the middle of an election year, for example, and I'm generating voices that sound very much like the politicians that I'm hearing about, and they say something that they didn't really say. That's a genuine concern, right? And so we're starting to see that a lot of these engines now are putting in place restrictions on what they can do in terms of the voices, for example, so the engines that we use can't be used, for example, to generate the voice of a well-known politician or even a well-known celebrity, because it's important that they actually enable they have the not only the control over their content and what the actual sound of their voice, but also the messages that they're giving as well. And so it's important that people understand what is real and what is actually not real. And so there's a challenge there in terms of trying to make sure that these AI engines are used for good purposes. And finally, the last part of that is engines that are now being able to create images. So we can say to an engine now, you've seen all these images from the entire internet. Now we want you to create an image of AJ climbing up a mountain, putting a flag on the top and saying he's conquered Mount Everest. And absolutely, you can now create images that have people in them, that have images in them. You can design the images themselves, and they do look amazingly photorealistic. So again, do I need a graphic designer to do that now, or a photographer? Well, if it's an imaginary scenario, then maybe not. Maybe I don't need a photographer now. I can do that by myself at home. I can type some words in and get a beautiful image that represents my product or what I'm talking about. But again, we need to make sure that there's the right restrictions around these AIs so that they are real images that are either coming out of a camera, or they're an artificial image, which is not actually AJ. It's not something that I can say actually happened in real life. It's actually an artificial image. So there, I think that the challenges and the exciting parts and the challenges of using artificial intelligence right now.
Right. Till challenges, it is fine. Now let's evaluate this. You talked about podcasts. It is good where you use the technology. It minimizes the type of work, the mundane work that you need to do. Now, in terms of, you see, the misuse, we all know about deepfakes. Last year, people were creating, just for example, that how things can go wrong. They were creating podcasts out of two historical figures and talking within themselves. And they were actually, people will find in due course, if you put it on the internet, and they were living, they were contemporaries, people will think these people actually had this conversation because people are not declaring it. But if you look at it in terms of learning, how these two people will, or how two presidents, or how two prime ministers in different eras talk, that is good in terms of learning. But as long as you have the right thing. So that is one part we need to understand. Now, in the present, let's look at this. One example is Sora in terms of images, video, and then we talk about Quora. 2 days back, I read an article which said that Quora is almost dead. Why? Because robots are answering, and then robots are answering those questions raised put out by robots itself. And so what is happening is it's a chain reaction which is going on where humans are off the creation process and robots are talking among themselves. People are using them. So that creativity is gone from the text. Quora is almost that the version of the writer was that Quora is dead in that sense. Whether yes or no, whether I still sometimes read if I feel that this is something very important. But now I also have to think whether this is correct or not correct. Perceptions can be different, but facts are different when people are writing about. Now, in terms of Sora, the Sora images are very real. Where is this aiding creativity? In some aspects, it is. If I need to go back into the past and I want to see those something created which I will not be able to, or anyone will not be able to do that, that is good. But if it pushes out the creators, pushes out the artists from the whole system, then it is a wrong thing. And who will give that guarantee? Initially, people may talk all about the good things, but I won't. Because you also talk about, artificial intelligence has come of age where we can do things now that are not quite human, but human enough.
Yes.
The fear is that this human will not be able to hold the thin red line for long. It will be pushed out.
Well,
and
that's
that is
that's
the
absolutely
danger
the
I want
challenge.
to know.
That is absolutely the challenge. So now we're seeing from OpenAI their latest model, which enables us to not just generate images, but a series of images. So videos now. So we haven't really seen how long this takes to create. The theory is it's going to take some minutes, tens of minutes even, to generate these little videos. But it's the first time we've seen someone saying that they can generate minutes worth of video. So up until now, it's been maybe a few seconds of video. So really just frame by frame by frame by frame, and maybe 15 frames as a second. They can get to a second, maybe a few seconds. So we've seen that in the past, but now we're seeing generating a minute's worth of video, which is really almost kind of long form. If you can do a minute, you can do 5 minutes. You can string a bunch of 5 minutes together. You can make an entire movie. You can make a whole video out of it. What are the challenges at the moment with the image creation and even the video creation? Is that it's very hard to do reproducible images. So I can do an image of a magically invented person, and they might be sitting in an armchair having a glass of wine. Great. It's great as a single image. What is really challenging is for us to be able to then say to the AI, I want another image of that same person that you've invented, but I want them in a different setting. So this is really hard right now. It's really hard to create an image of a person that looks a certain way and reproduce them again somewhere else in a different setting, because the engine doesn't really it doesn't kind of understand what it's done to actually create that image. It just creates an image of a person out of its, I'm going to say imagination, but really it's out of its data bank of what people look like. But it's very hard to do that again. And so we'll be seeing images of, seeing videos now of people that are walking down a street or having a glass of wine seeing them having a cup of coffee in a coffee shop. And that'll be interesting on its own. But then it's very hard to get that same person and put them in another setting for another video and enable them to do something else. So there's still a gap there. Short form videos, short amounts of things, no problems. It's a big challenge now to tell it from reality, but still it's very hard to take that person and make them do different things. And so even getting them to talk or be able to sync their lips with text is hard. So I don't think we're going to see movies in the next 5 minutes, in the next couple of, maybe even 6 months, maybe even a year. In 5 years' time, we'll probably be able to create an entire movie from scratch and be able to say, I'd like a movie with me in it, for example, and it's an action movie, and this is the things that I want to happen, and it'll be able to generate that whole thing. But we're just on that kind of beginning of that creative journey. But I do think it enables us to use our imagination in new ways. I don't know a few years ago, AJ, when Photoshop came out, everyone was like, well, we don't need photographers anymore, and we can just make anything out of anything. It doesn't matter. That's not really what happened. It enabled a whole area of creativity to open up for people to use graphic design to create new images. It created an entire new industry that wasn't there before. And so what we are seeing is that we'll see people that are using artificial intelligence to generate images and videos an entire industry will spring up that there wasn't there before. Now, maybe there'll be less of using humans for particular tasks, but we've always found with technology that it really does open up new opportunities for us to do new things, use our imagination in new ways, and these tools enable us to be creative and to create things we hadn't even imagined before. And so that's why I think it's an exciting time for us using AI, because it does open up new opportunities for us, both in terms of business and in terms of our creativity in our own personal lives.
Right, right. In terms of our personal lives, how much we will have control over our lives in the coming days? Because already the issue, one of the top guys told me that, listen, we must understand that there is nothing called privacy in today's time. We may consider sometimes, but we must. So we have to use everything that we are using either on internet or on our phones with a lot of precaution. Do not consider yourself secure or very private. Private things are private. Do not bring anything, all those things, any of those things online. How do you see this part going forward? Because everything is so interconnected. All those barons who own these companies, they are doing farming, creating bunkers for themselves, whereas we are using these phones and all this technology and giving our whole story, whole life to them in the form of data. How do we see a lot of these companies, earlier governments, democracies were powerful. They used to represent the will of the people. But now some of these companies have got so much of power that companies or even the elected government officials, they are depending on those people during elections, during other things, and even President Biden, he was using all those images during this thing. You may not like TikTok, but again, you are using TikTok so that you can reach people. And artificial intelligence injected into these things can create huge amount of impact for you, presumably, but you are also giving away the power to these companies. In the same way, very recent report, China has apparently hired many private companies with deep powers of hacking into individuals and organizations and countries. So that is also alarming in the sense. So what I mean to say is that the big artificial intelligence that is we are talking about, not till the level businesses can use it in the right manner, that can pose the big challenge for governments, for individuals who are electing a government, but
Yes.
later on that thing is actually not happening on the ground. That is the big challenge. Democracy might get impacted. It is almost like a new world order setting in with those who are having the power of the artificial intelligence, who are controlling artificial intelligence, and of those who do not have that capacity. You may be very good in one thing, but you are not good at how robots talk. Help us, give us an understanding of this aspect. You are a technology expert, Ian.
Yeah, that's a good question, and there are many things we should be worried about here. So if I can't control my own image, the use of my own image, the use of my voice, and some other company has access to my voice and has access to my image, then what control do I have at that point? What's going to stop these companies taking my image and taking my voice and making me say anything that they want? I mean, I don't think that anyone's too worried about what I'm going to say, but for some people that are in a position of power or position of influence in terms of our politics and our government, that can be very important and very disastrous, in fact, in many ways, because if they can be say something that's market affecting and that gets out and people believe it for 5 minutes, that can definitely have effect on the markets and how people do financially as well. And so we are seeing governments now that are spending a fair amount of time and effort in order to get their hands around what this technology means and how we should regulate it. So in the EU, for example, has just published some legislation that tries to define what companies can and can't do with AI, both in terms of the generation of images and videos and text and so on, but also in terms of where does this data come from? So what data can companies access that gives them this ability to do these things in the first place? And what permissions do they need in order to be able to use this data for their business? And so I think that's important that governments get their hands around what this means. And in many ways, I agree that we have kind of run along in terms of our technology, but the legislation is only just starting to go, hang on a minute. Is this really what we want to happen? Is this really how we want to act as a society? So that's important that the governments make some lines in the sand about what we think is acceptable as a society in terms of what these artificial intelligences can do and what these companies have access to in terms of feeding the actual AI itself in terms of what their capabilities are. So I think we're getting there. I think that we're not quite there yet because even as governments are making this legislation, the technology is barreling down. And I think it's too late to stop this now. I don't think it's a thing that we want. I think it's a new tool. It's a new capability. There's exciting things on the horizon for us. But with all technology change, we need to make sure that the people that are involved in this, both in terms of actors and voice actors and content writers, have rights that are appreciated and respected within our society, but also that we can have the opportunity to make use of this amazing technology to increase our creativity, give us extra powers in terms of our ability to do things that we couldn't do before. That's a great thing. But we need to make sure that we do that in a way that respects the capability, the content, and the people that are going to be using these tools themselves.
Right, Ian. So while we are talking of artificial intelligence, there is new thing called artificial general intelligence. Now, help us understand that. I've heard a couple of people talking about it. I once Googled it, but then I forgot exactly what it is all about. So tell us exactly this artificial general intelligence is all about. Again, is it a threat? Is it a good thing? How should we look at it?
Yeah, so as we've seen these large language models, which is probably the best example, where we used to be able to ask them a simple question like, what is the capital of Paris? What is the capital of France? And it would say, it's Paris. So that's some sense of, does it feel intelligent or does it just know facts? Okay, so maybe that's more like a fact. And then we'd say, okay, can you write a poem about Paris? Tell us about give us a 4-line poem about what it feels like to walk along the river in Paris. Okay, so now it's generating text that seems a little more intelligent, a little more creative. Even the best of these large language models now can generate very plausible, very interesting, very capable summaries of text. It can generate information about other text that it knows about. It can be reasonably creative about things, but it's really not approached the level of writing an actual passionate novel that gets our heartstrings going, gets us excited. It's kind of just a little bit bland. It's kind of capable of writing sentences, but not really kind of, I don't know, sort of not really approaching what humans can do in terms of our capabilities of writing and even creativity in terms of painting or capturing images and so on. And AGI is really about getting to the point where it is, to that point, indistinguishable from what a very capable human could do, and in some ways even beyond human. In some ways, these large language models are already slightly beyond humans in that they have access to all the knowledge of the entire internet at their disposal. You and I could look something up, but if we are having a discussion and we're not on the internet, it's very hard for us to remember when exactly did this particular historical event happen? Well, large language models have access to all that information in their heads, if you like, already. Okay, so we've got a whole ton of facts behind us. If we add the ability to be incredibly creative as well, if we have access to all of human knowledge, then we're at a point of beyond just being an expert in something, but being an expert in everything, like a general intelligence, generally accessible, generally capable of anything. At that point, we've reached a level where some people refer to it as almost like the singularity, like the point where the intelligences that we've created are smarter than us. And this is the thing that we're now talking about in terms of AGI. So what does that mean for humanity? What does it mean for us? The worry that people have is that the general intelligences, these amazing machines, will look at humanity and go, well, I don't know, they're not so good after all. Maybe we won't keep them around. Is that the worry? In fact, we have to remember that these intelligences themselves are really just computer programs. They are software that is running. It doesn't have any more capability to do anything other than what we give it to do ourselves or give it control over. And so if it's generating text, if it's generating images, Maybe it can be amazingly persuasive. Maybe it can create beautiful images. But really, it's not going to take over the world and start doing things to humanity. It doesn't have that capability. It's just a computer program that's running. But what's exciting about that is that imagine if you had access to an intelligence that knew everything, was entirely capable of describing things to you in a way that you understood it, that could teach you and help you learn about things that you're interested in. That sounds amazing. That sounds great. And so that's the positive side of this idea of an AGI. It is an exciting concept, but we have to remember that in the real world, outside of science fiction, these intelligences are not really a thing that's biologically capable of doing anything. It's just a piece of software that we can turn off at the end of the day. And so really we don't have anything to worry about in terms of those. Now, let's hope that no one watches this video in 10 years' time and realizes that the entire world's been taken over by an AGI. But I don't think we have anything to be worried about. Like most software, it's a tool. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. But again, that's like with all the tools that humanity's had all the way along.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would also like to be very positive on this, like you are.
Good.
And let's look at the situation as it unfolds. But we humans are smart, much more smarter than perhaps we ourselves know. Be that as it may, let us talk about your company, Pulse Podcast. So tell us a bit about that. What do you do, and how people can make use of it?
Absolutely. So we're excited about what we're doing because we were looking at creating podcasts for companies to help them expand their marketing efforts. And what we were finding is that to actually create a podcast, it's an expensive, time-consuming effort. You need to get people into a studio. You need to be creating scripts. And we wanted to help companies do this, to create these scripts and to create these recordings and to add music and to mix it all together. And we have some companies that work with us doing this kind of thing. But what occurred to us is that there were many companies that really did want to get into podcasting, because now with podcasting, we're seeing that there's hundreds of millions of users that love listening to podcasts every day across the world. That people drawn into podcasts because whatever particular thing you're interested in, you can find a podcast that is about that particular thing. The beauty of podcasts is that for me, I can find something that is exactly what I'm interested in. Fantastic. Okay, that's great. And if I'm interested in a particular brand or a particular technology or a particular hobby or whatever, or a particular location, that's great. But the difficulty is for the people that are providing this content into a podcasting form. If there's a small audience that's not many thousands or hundreds or millions of listeners, it's actually really quite expensive to produce based on the number of people that are listening to it. Okay, so is there a way we can reduce that cost and make it accessible? So what we've done is to help companies use the content they're already creating. So if you're creating an email newsletter or you're creating blog content on a regular basis, you're doing this already, then we can help you by taking that existing content. We create scripts using artificial intelligence. We do several revisions of that. Then we take the scripts, we feed it into an artificial intelligence that creates a voice, and it's beautiful recording of the voice. And then we use our software to create a platform that actually enables people to mix music into it as well, to actually edit the actual audio itself and upload it and create descriptions and titles and everything for the whole podcast itself. And so the exciting part is that companies can now create a beautiful, engaging podcast based on their existing content for a tenth of the cost that it would cost normally to actually get a voiceover artist to do the actual voice, to get a content creator to create the script itself. So we can still do that, have those capabilities for companies that really need that sort of attention. But for a lot of companies or a lot of government agencies or cities or local government areas, it enables them to reach their local area. For example, for local councils that have maybe they have 50,000 people in their constituency, and to create a podcast would be enormously expensive for the number of people in their constituency. But now they can do it cheaply and easily, and people can use that to get hold of the information that's happening in their local area on a regular basis and wherever they happen to be. And the great thing about podcasts is that you can get access to the same content that you might read on the web, but in an audio form. So now that if I'm commuting, I can now access that content while I'm on a train, rather than having to have a phone or having a laptop out to be able to access that same content. And we're seeing some great uptake with companies that we can now produce some beautiful content based on their existing content at a much lower cost. And that's, I think, one of the advantages of artificial intelligence is it gives us that capability of doing great things reaching niche audience, and producing a quality product at a much lower cost than we were doing previously.
Wonderful. So, what is the best way for people to learn more about you, connect with you, and connect with your company?
We'd love you to come and visit us at Pulse Podcast, www.pulsepodcast.com. Check out some of our sample podcasts, and we can show you from an existing newsletter and how we've turned it into a beautiful podcast, and drop us a note, and we'll show you how we can do exactly the same thing for you. So send us some content. We'll turn it into a podcast for you, and you can see what it sounds like. That would be great.
Wonderful. Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me along today. It's been great.